Welcome to the Legal Insurrection Podcast. Today is May 29th, if you can believe that, and this is our 28th episode. I'm Kimberly Kay with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson, and we have a lot to discuss this week. Headed into the end of May, which I'm sure for those of y'all who have children are running around like crazy in what we've now called Maycember with all of the end of year activities. I know we are, and other lies I tell myself, things will slow down after this weekend when they finally finish most of what they have going on, at least for a couple of months. But I would like to start talking today about something that's laughable and also very sad, and that's the Democrats' plan to win back male voters after spending solid 2 decades, the last decade in particular, maligning masculinity, labeling it as toxic, having an all-out war on men, and then losing the male vote across the board in every demographic, not just one, not just a few, but across the board. And now they're scrambling to get back what they've demonized. So can you tell us a little bit about that? There's some very interesting articles written about this, and the closed doors conversations that the Democrats are having as they're grappling with this problem of their own creation.
Well, this was based on reporting by the New York Times, which reported on what Democrat insiders are focusing on and talking about and strategizing about. And basically, they did 250 focus groups, or at least one of their organizers, 250 focus groups. And the feedback was not great, okay? I'll just read you very briefly. Republicans are seen as apex predators like lions, tigers, and sharks, beasts that take what they want when they want it. Democrats are typically tagged as tortoises, slugs, or sloths, slow, plodding, passive. So that was the feedback, which has Democrats very worried. It's funny because I actually think it's the opposite. It's funny how Democrats view us the way we view them.
Right.
But be that as it may, but the point of the story really was that some group who's tied to these insiders have come up with a plan. And the plan is called SAM, S-A-M, short for Speaking with American Men, a Strategic Plan. Well, right there, if they need a strategic plan and talk to American men, they've got a massive problem,
Yes.
which promises to study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in these spaces. It recommends buying advertisements and video games, among other things. So that got a lot of play on X and elsewhere. That, my goodness, first of all, you've completely stereotyped men as exactly the sort of stereotypes that have gotten you into trouble with men to begin with. Okay, you
Yes,
treat them
exactly.
like some sort of foreign species. It reminds me, and I forget what year it was, 2010 or 12, about some reporters who went on a trip to, I forget where it was, Texas or Oklahoma or someplace. And it was like they were visiting foreign countries. They reported on the trip to Texas. Okay. And it was like, and that's how the Democrats are. They get almost half the vote. In an honest year, they get just below half the vote. But this created a lot of stir, and they've done this before. White dudes for Harris. They've run
Yes.
commercials. There was some really cringy commercial. I'm a man. I'm willing to talk about my feelings. It's like, don't get men to talk about their feelings, please. Okay, you totally don't understand. And so that's it. That's the Democrats apparently believe, and I think they're right, that they have a major problem. The problem is they view it as a messaging problem, a public relations problem, not a core problem. And so that's Sam speaking with American men. Let's see if we see advertisements, about that.
I know. Well, one of the things about all of this, among many things that strikes me too, is this approach is just so absurdly academic and a product of the higher education nonsense. It's like, let's form a committee, let's do focus groups, let's come up with the proper messaging. That's not how you relate to people. Trump did none of those things. He's very candid, he's authentic. And I think people, especially now that we have someone on the national stage who is able to connect with people on a real level, who's able to be authentic, because with Trump, like him or hate him, you know exactly what you get with him. You know who he is, you know how he is. So now we have a very stark contrast between all of the ridiculous, fluffy messaging, all of these made up words, all of the newspeak terms that they keep, injecting into broad culture. And then they're constantly telling men that everything about them is wrong, and really that the only way that they could ever be acceptable in society now is if they become more like women. And I would argue that's the problem exactly, is that we are suffering a major masculinity deficit because of these people and because of their messaging. And I really think this is not at all going to help them, because even their approach indicates to me that they haven't the slightest clue what they're dealing with. They haven't the slightest clue what the problem is. And, it's just, but, more power to them and their committee with all the acronyms. That seems to be their style. So, but yeah.
Yeah, combine that with Hillary, who just won't go away. The
Oh
woman
my
just
gosh,
won't
I
go
know.
away, encouraging people to talk about how bad Trump is at Memorial Day gatherings. And then they put together this was an author, so it's not an official Democrat thing, but Democrats are talking about putting together a shadow cabinet. Okay? So basically, they're going to try to run the government while not in the government, which is like a British thing. They talk about the shadow cabinet. And they want to put together a list of heavy hitters for the shadow cabinet. And it's really quite comical. But that's the whole mentality. They don't accept that they lost the election. They don't accept that they've lost touch with a lot of people. They just
Yeah.
think it's a messaging issue, and that if they get the right people out there, but the people who were on the list of the heavy proposed shadow cabinet, Samantha Power. I mean, oh my God, shadow Secretary of State. She's like the ultimate swamp creature who's been there, I think, since Obama. I'm not
Yes.
really
She was
sure.
from the Obama years.
Yep. Letitia James from New York as the shadow attorney general. Um, John Tester, who lost, I think, his election or chose not to run because he was going to lose, wherever he's from, Montana or Wyoming, something like that.
Mhm.
Mark Cuban as Secretary of Commerce. Katie Hobbs is from Arizona, Secretary of Education. John Stewart as Shadow Secretary of Veteran Affairs. I don't get that one at all. This is the best one. Giselle Fetterman, who apparently at one point was an illegal alien, as the Shadow Secretary of Homeland Security. I happen to kind of like her husband now. I think
Yeah.
he's been like the the single probably most positive surprise, uh, certainly in the past year, in
Yes.
politics. So I have nothing against her, but I'm not sure having a former illegal alien is the best for the department in charge of ICE and all the other entities. And then this one, I keep saying this is the best, and the next gets even better. Bill Nye as Environmental Protection Agency
He
Administrator.
just played a scientist on TV when I was a
He
kid. The
just plays
man
the
is
scientist.
not
He's not actually a
credentialed.
scientist. Okay. and Ben Stein is shadow trade representative. I don't even know what the trade
Oh,
representative,
come on. Yeah,
but
that
that's so Democrats have a problem, and that's not to say Republicans don't have problems.
right,
Republicans' problem are Republicans. Okay,
right.
uh, there are Republicans are their own worst enemy. Look at the
Every
dysfunction in Congress, part of which is
yes,
caused by only having like a 3-seat lead in the House, but the Senate's no better. So Republicans are always like 1 inch away from falling off a cliff. And
yes,
so that's Republican problem is Republicans. Democrats' problem is everybody else. And
yes.
so that's where we are. That's where we are.
It's I mean, it's laughable, it's sad. I just don't understand how they can be that completely tone deaf because they seem to be. I mean, you would think at some point someone would walk into the room and shake them and say, "None of this is working. What do you plan to do?" And so far that has not happened. So far they keep lurching further and further leftward and to other strangeness and things that continue to show a complete and total lack of self-awareness for everything that they do. And I mean, they're continuing to marginalize themselves further as opposed to making any attempt to connect with people or to regain some kind of support outside of being the opposition. And the opposition only works for so long, but when the economy starts to turn better, you're going to lose a lot of that opposition because at the end of the day, how much money is left in a bank account after the bills are paid and groceries are purchased speaks a lot louder.
Yeah, and on that topic, Rasmussen, which has been polling various things for decades, really. I mean, it changed hands a few years ago, but it was one of the most accurate in the last couple of presidential cycles. And we, in fact,
Yes.
interviewed Pete Polster on this. And when we interviewed him, he was basically saying, don't believe any of these polls. This was over the summer, I think, in 2024.
Yes.
We'd say Harris is ahead. They're all lying. And come close to election day, they'll all change. And they did. And of course, Trump won both the popular vote and the electoral vote. But Rasmussen polls whether you think the U.S. is on the right track. And that's one of those kind of basic questions. You don't have to define, you either think we're on the right track or you don't. We don't need elaborate definitions of what on the right track means. So it's a gauge of public sentiment. And for the first time, I think them asking this question, I think it's 20 or 25 years, whatever the number is, but a long time. For the first time in their history, a majority of people, so over 50% of people, think the country's on the right track. That's pretty astounding. And that shows that whatever Democrats have been throwing, all their hysteria, Trump is Hitler, it's the end of democracy, this is how nations fail, etc., etc. Elon Musk is going to pilfer Social Security and send it to his bank account. All this craziness that I see nonstop from people I knew growing up who are now on Facebook. I mean, complete, you know, derangement. It's apparently
Yes.
not sticking. Most people think we're on the right track. The immigration stuff is very popular. People understand we are in a very dire situation. And you combine that, which is kind of a more of a long-term measurement, with a more volatile measurement, which is consumer sentiment. Consumer sentiment index, I think they call it. Dramatically in the last measure, which was last week, I believe. I can't remember if it was Monday or last week, but the last time they did it recently, um, unexpected surge in consumer optimism,
Yes.
way beyond what they even forecast. So they before they do it, they have best case scenario, kind of worst case scenario, and then project. This beat everything dramatically. And I think people understand that things are on the upswing. And, the drama from 6 or 8 weeks ago, you killed my retirement because the stock market dropped, a few percentage points. You killed my
One day.
retirement. I'm going to be able to retire now. You threw it all away. I mean, these things are passing. And so you take Are we on the right track? You take consumer sentiment. I think the Democrats are in big trouble. They probably, just because it's kind of almost a law of nature, they probably will regain the House just because that's the way it works in midterms. And it's really close going into it. But if that's 18 months away, if the economy picks up, if inflation stays down, which it has, if um, you know, food prices stabilize, if these investments, Trump basically ran around the world in the Middle East, doing deals with countries to invest in the U.S. That's something that takes time. That doesn't just happen like next month. Those are years long things. Once those things start to kick in, I think Democrat focus groups are going to be even worse for them. And I think the hysteria, end of world stuff is people are going to tune them out if they haven't tuned them out already.
No, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think they've worked themselves into a corner for various reasons, some of which we just discussed. I was actually very surprised with the Rasmussen polling as well, because if you listen to the media or if you listen to anything, that's not what you hear. But there's also something, at least it's been labeled on X and other social media platforms, this idea of fatigue, where people are just tired. They're tired of the cultural absurdness that we see. They're tired of people acting like savages in stores and just like losing their minds over stupid things. They're tired of seeing this extreme emotional dysregulation all over the public space. They're tired of hearing people being unrightly and wrongly maligned as, Trump Hitler, and just all of these overstatements. You can only use those things for so long before they become meaningless, and at some point backfire and create, I think, exactly what we're experiencing right now. It's just a bitterness and a tuning out, and, as it's been labeled appropriately, fatigue, with all of these things that they've utilized for the past decade. And so I'm very curious to see what the trajectory is from here. I don't think it gets any better for the Democrats. Of course, I mean, they are pretty much now the party of abortion. That's really all they have left. Because that one, as we know, stirs up the hornet's nest every single time they need it, and they go and kick it when it serves them and when they have nothing else left. But really, outside of that, who are they and what are they and what do they stand for? Mutilating children? Okay. Public sentiment is not with them on that. Judging people by the color of their skin, again, public sentiment's not with them on that either. So really, what do they have left to stand for that's even close to the mainstream? um and I don't think it's very much. So they are right that they are struggling with messaging, which is also just such a beltway thing to be focused on messaging and not the actual work. Like every time, we have meetings or we do anything inside the beltway or listen to these beltway things, it's always messaging, 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 and we're like, but what about the work that needs to be done? um it's just because it's just they're out of touch. So I don't know. I think it's very interesting times. I don't know how they win public support from here, but I'm not sad that this is kind of blowing up in their face either, because at some point you have to deal with the consequences of your own actions, and they can panic about it and have as many focus groups as they want, but as long as they think that putting ads on video games is going to win back the male vote, like, I think we're okay. So there's so much more to it than that. But speaking of the Beltway, we DOGE has been in the headlines quite a bit lately. They finally were able to gain access to the Treasury Department, and then we also have Elon heading out. At least for now in this capacity. So, what are your thoughts on that with everything happening there? I know they've been a tremendously effective and instrumental tool for the Trump administration, And I still think, I know we've talked about this before, it was strategically brilliant of them to start to take DOGE and to start where they started with USAID. Um, and now they're kind of moving, they're expanding beyond that in meaningful ways.
You know, the concept of, going after government waste, of which there is a ton, is very popular. It polls like 70, 80%. It's one of those 80-20 issues, like men and girls sports is an 80-20 issue against it. But of course, the
Right.
Democrats are for it. Cutting out government waste is an 80-20, issue in favor of those efforts. And of course, the Democrats are against it. And they brutalized Elon Musk. They vandalized his company. They targeted his company. I mean, these are people who've never created anything in their entire lives. They're leeches on the system. And they tried to suck the life out of Tesla by keying people's cars, ramming them on the road, vandalizing dealerships. And that really is, a shame. But he didn't leave because of that. Again, this is how the media misleads people. They'll do a headline, CBS News headline. Elon Musk signals his time-leading DOGE is coming to an end. Well, yeah, because he's a special government employee, and the day he started, he said, I can only be here 130 days by law. So when he started, he said, I'm not going to be here forever. And now they're leaving the impression with people that he was leaving because he failed. He
Yes.
accomplished a lot, but he ran up against a horrible, horrible bureaucracy and a horrible, horrible set of district court judges who interfered with his ability and DOGE's ability to do their job. And so he's accomplished a lot. He's reset the public narrative, but he paid a price. My wife was driving today, and she showed me a bumper sticker somebody had that had the word Musk with a line through it, a red line through it. Or it was Elon with a line through it. Like, who puts that on their car? Are you a crazy person? Is something mentally wrong with you that you feel the need to put on your car Elon Musk crossed out? I mean, that's what we've come to. He deserves praise. He deserves our congratulations and our thanks for trying to save the country. He accomplished a lot, not everything he wanted to. And part of the problem he ran into was not just a completely deranged media and leftist activism agenda. He also ran into some judges who got it way wrong. And one of the things I wrote about on the website last night was about one of the most egregious cases, one of the earliest and the most egregious cases. It was in early February. So Trump had only been in office 3 weeks, something like that, maybe not even 3 full weeks. And at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning, a judge in the Southern District of New York who was serving on the emergency docket. So the people against the administration, and for those of you who haven't watched our podcast before, there was an organized effort beginning immediately after the election to get hundreds, New York Times reported 800, hundreds of lawyers lined up, dozens, they reported over 40, of groups ready to run into court to challenge every single thing that the Trump administration does. And that's what they've been doing. And one of the first things they challenged was DOGE having access to the Treasury Department payment systems. And they ran into court in the Southern District of New York, hair on fire, knowing which judge they would get because there's only one judge on the emergency docket. You go to just file a regular case, even if you want an emergency injunction. But if you file it at like 4 p.m., you get assigned whoever's available. It's actually, they call it random assignment. It's not technically random, truly random, but it's basically random. You don't know who you're going to get. But if you run in like they did at 10 p.m. on a Friday night and say, we need an injunction tonight or the world is over, you know which judge you're going to get. They got Judge Paul Engelmeyer. I don't know him before that. I don't know him after that. But that's who they obviously wanted, and that's who they got. And he, on a case that was filed at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, seeking to cut off all DOGE access to Treasury payment systems on the threat that, oh, they're going to steal all the information, all your bank accounts and everything are going to get purloined, etc. None of that was actually true. But they ran in, and without him even giving the government a chance to be heard, issued at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning, an ex parte, meaning the other side hasn't been had a chance to be heard. Ex parte TRO, which by its terms precluded all political appointees at the Treasury Department from accessing Treasury payment systems. That means the Secretary of Treasury couldn't do it. None of the leadership. It essentially decapitated the leadership. It was one of the most outrageous things, and it was aimed at DOGE on the false accusation that they were improperly accessing information. By the time the actual judge in the case was assigned, which was the next day, scheduled a Tuesday morning hearing, scaled back that injunction, didn't eliminate it, but scaled it back and let more of the political appointees do it. And it was just a horrible case at every level. The court making a distinction between career employees and political appointees, as if our government should be run by career employees, not by the representative or the designees of the people we elected. I mean, it turned the whole constitutional scheme upside down. I don't remember if they tried to take it to the Supreme Court. I'm thinking not, because the way she scaled it back, although it didn't eliminate it, I guess they could live with. And so
Mm-hmm.
hurtled through her court for 2 or 3 months, for 3 months actually. And last night, or 2 nights ago, she didn't lift the injunction, but she modified it and basically removed all of those restrictions and said, okay, DOGE can now have access to it, provided that the DOGE people who do it have received certain training and certain certifications and things like that. There's a bunch of issues there. First of all, who is it? How is it up to a federal judge to determine what the security training should be for government IT people? Why is that a judge's decision?
Mm-hmm.
It's not. Where
Yes.
in the Constitution or in any statute does it let the judge micromanage personnel decisions? So that's number one. Even the way she ended the case, which is being reported in the headlines as a big win for Trump, it's not really a big win, because you know what? The people he wanted to review those systems for fraud, and that's why they were reviewing them. They weren't reviewing them to see, what your grandmother got in her Social Security check. They were reviewing, accounts that had been flagged for fraud, or that had other questions. They wanted to be able to look at it, to understand it. And they lost access for 3 months. So the fact that the federal judiciary issued a decision it never should have issued, and that 3 months later they more or less undid it, that's 3 months that the Trump administration can never get back. And guess what? That's 3 months out of the 130 days Elon Musk had in this administration. That's almost the entirety of his time. His people were shut out of those normal systems. And that's not right. And that's what's been going on with the federal courts. And I hope John Roberts wakes up. But what is happening is so wrong. This goes so far beyond judicial review. When you have a federal judge telling the Treasury Department what security and privacy training their people need to have, as opposed to the experts at the Treasury Department who do that,
Right.
we're having the judge do that. Something so wrong with what has happened. And I don't know what John Roberts is doing, twiddling his thumbs over at the Supreme Court and waiting to issue stay orders. Why isn't he out there jawboning the federal judiciary like he did the Trump
Yeah.
administration? When people started complaining about these judicial decisions, saying maybe we should impeach the judges, which is, of course, a perfectly lawful process. I mean, that is one of the processes to be used. We're not talking about threatening judges. We're saying we will use a lawful process of impeachment to get rid of judges who are issuing these out-of-bounds decisions. John Roberts sure did speak up about that, how that's improper, and we can't have that. Well, why isn't he out there speaking out against judges who have taken over the micromanagement of the executive branch, against judges who don't even consider their own jurisdiction to hear matters. We have all these cases about the termination of grants and contracts. Those shouldn't even be in federal court. Those have to go to the Court of Claims. Why are these judges issuing injunctions on that? And why isn't the Supreme Court stepping in quicker? And so that's where we are, is that Elon Musk is undermined not just by the terror campaign against him and his company, but also by the federal judiciary, which stepped out of its lane and issued injunctions interfering with DOGE's operations when it never should have. And that time was precious because it ate up most of Elon Musk's time in the federal government.
I mean, I 100% agree with everything you just said. And I mean, we've talked about this in other forums too, the judiciary that's just so completely out of control and legislating from the bench and acting as though they have more authority than the executive to make determinations in functions that are specifically delegated to the executive branch, even. And it's just mind blowing the things that we've seen and that they've been able to at least stall much of what this administration is trying to do with no consequence and no recourse up to this point, other than, file an appeal. Okay, well, now it's still going to wait, which, like we've talked about, is 100% the strategy. If they can just hold things up for long enough, then the change that needs to happen possibly won't. So it's just so frustrating. And, you know, and I do in some ways feel a little bit bad for Elon for having to deal with all of these things, just for going in with his team of nerds, and trying to expose government waste, fraud, and abuse. Everyone complains about this all the time. And we all knew that there was a tremendous amount of waste. I don't think anyone had any clue just how much. We definitely didn't know that the majority of the Democratic NGO and nonprofit ecosystem was as incestuous as it was, and that we were paying for all of it. We didn't know that. I didn't know that. I mean, we suspected that there was at least some, but I don't think anyone realized the extent to which this had penetrated, almost every single agency, NGO, internationally and domestic. And anyway, I mean, it makes a lot of things make sense, but they've done really fantastic work. And I know they're nowhere near done, but it's a Democrats are rough. And like you said, that's why it's kind of funny that they think of themselves as being sloths and slugs and all of that, because they are vicious. They're so nasty and mean when anyone opposes them. So, um, but similar to that vein and the judicial overreach, and things happening there, we've seen that happen a lot on the immigration front, and not directly related to immigration in terms of border security. But Rubio is just done with the nonsense. I absolutely loved watching these hearings where he's being questioned, and you can tell, I mean, he's been in this game for so long. He is just done, and he would not have anything from anyone trying to pin things on him or the State Department, the accusations that they're holding up actual aid, the accusations that they're purposely hurting international students. He's just done. And and I love everything about this. I love that they are finally going after student visas. And I know I've talked about this a little bit, but there was a time in my immigration law lifespan where I was authorized by Homeland Security to issue the paperwork through CVIS for student visas, F1, F2 visas, and for student scholars, which would be J1 and J2 visas. And so I've worked in higher education and immigration. I've seen what that looks like from the inside. I know what universities are required to do in order to maintain the opportunity to sponsor or to allow international students to study at their school. The majority of which, I think there may be some public misconception about this. It seems like if you are not familiar with this space, when we think international students, that it's largely undergrads, and that's not true. And part of the reason this is so would be so devastating to so many different institutions and universities is because the majority of these very large college campuses, their graduate population is comprised more than 50% of international students. The majority of those are coming from China and somewhere in the Middle East, usually Qatar, and other places that don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. You know, we know that they're actively working against American interests here and abroad. And so for them to start walking some of this back and to really look at the system is much needed. And for just a mini history lesson, the whole SEVIS system was created along with Homeland Security post 9/11, because some of the alleged perpetrators in the 9/11 attacks had come in for flight school. And so they wanted some kind of nationwide database to track who was coming in from where. They amended some of the requirements. But one of the things I think it's also very important to understand anytime we're talking about visas and visa issuance, at least from the American perspective, and most other countries are this way, and most other countries are far more particular and harsh about this than we are. We're actually very lenient. Is that a visa is a privilege. A visa is not a guarantee. It allows you to be a visitor in our country for a very specific purpose, for a very specific time period. And if you violate the terms of that visa, so if you come in on a student visa and you do not have work authorization and you are working, then you are in violation of that visa. And that means that it can be withdrawn and you can lose your legal status in the country. Same applies on a student visa. If you're overwhelmed for a semester and you drop a class and you are under the minimum required hours, then without certain stipulations, if you don't maintain, there's things there, then you no longer are maintaining the terms of that visa and your permission can be revoked and you no longer have legal status. So these things are not guarantees. They don't allow you entrants to just come in and be an American. That's not what's happening here. It's for a very particular purpose. It's why we have so many different visa types. It's why there's very particular things you can do and cannot do when you are on these visas because you are considered a visitor in this country. And when that visitation has been exploited and taken advantage of, as it has, particularly by um, harmful interest in China. And that's not to say that everyone from China is doing that. Some people are just here for a good education. But when those things have been exploited, it's time to really look at what's happening there and be honest about what's happening and to treat the visa system the way it should have been handled this entire time, which is that it is not a license to do anything except to come for a very particular purpose. And so if there's any misapprehension about that, I hope to clear that up and, you know, just generally provide some context here. But the fact that they are taking that on at Harvard and elsewhere, Harvard especially, I think that's one of the biggest reasons that's such a big deal for them is because they have a massive number of international students who are here on these visas, and a huge portion of their graduate programs enroll international students. So it's not just what happens for these students, it's what happens monetarily for the institution that now is losing the ability to host half of their student body. And I'm not saying that with any empathy in my heart whatsoever towards Harvard, because like they shouldn't be doing the things that they're doing. It's just to say that's part of what the struggle is and part of what the fight is here.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something that they're apoplectic over at the Kennedy School at Harvard, which is 60% apparently foreign,
Yeah.
which is quite astounding. So it's basically a foreign school.
Yeah.
And I think Harvard's 25% foreign. I don't know the breakdown by program. I forget what Columbia's 50%. What we've done is we've taken the great American universities, we've turned them into foreign universities. We have
Yep.
brought in a student body, which in some cases is majority foreign or is such a substantial minority foreign that it changes the whole flavor of the school, the whole nature of the school. We combine that with a lot of faculties, which are significantly foreign. That's one of the other things Trump has announced, that they're going to be looking not just at student visas, but at employee visas for higher ed, but particularly for Harvard. We've brought in radical foreign professors. We have brought in foreign students disproportionately to what anybody really understands. And we have
Yes.
a faculty which is hostile to the United States in large part. Not completely,
Yes.
but certainly the vocal people on the faculty are hostile to the US. So these are in many ways not even American schools anymore. Columbia is in many ways not even an American school. Harvard, in many ways, is not even an American school anymore. And the question then becomes, why should they then get the benefits and the privileges of tax exemption, of federal funding, of all the perks that come along with being an American school? And why should we be funding foreign schools which happen to be located on American soil? And that's, I think, what's percolating and bubbling up. And part of the public anger is that nobody really knew this. Nobody really understood that. When I saw the statistic that Columbia is 50% or thereabouts foreign, that shocked me. And I'm not ignorant of what goes on in higher ed. And I read that the Kennedy School was 60% foreign. That shocked me. And again, I haven't paid a lot of attention to the Kennedy School at Harvard, but I'm aware of it. I'm certainly aware
Right.
of it. And in so many of these instances, it's been foreigners who have led the campus intifada revolution. And a
Mm-hmm.
couple of them were trying to deport, and they're fighting it with support from Democrats and the ACLU and others. So I think we're really at a crisis.
100%. Yeah, I mean it's a 100% deportable offense. You know that. You're educated
Yeah.
on that when you come into these schools. Um, and one of the things I would add too, so I, to answer a question that I've seen bouncing around a little bit, right? Which is that how is this even possible? How do you get all of these foreigners with these foreign faculty? So, this is what it looks like. You have foreign researchers, as you mentioned, who come in and they have a specific grant. Sometimes government funded, sometimes it's in partnership with some entity from their home country. So, this entity from the home country is essentially paying for their person to do this research in partnership with the sponsoring university in the United States, right? So then that faculty member then brings in other researchers from the same home country, and they cycle them through for as long as the work permit. They're usually it's an H-1B or a J visa, which doesn't really matter, but just for general awareness here. Um, so they bring in these other researchers who come in as international students, usually graduate students. And the thing that happens here too is, so these international students come in, and again, this is not everyone, but this is a large majority of it. None of these people even speak English. Most of the time, barely enough to be functional, barely enough to satisfy whatever requirements have to be satisfied, which, as you can imagine, poses many problems when you're having to renew visa stuff and things like that, where you're dealing with students who are admitted to these top tier research institutions who passed whatever little English test. I think it was TOEFL or something like that, or it used to be. Um, Proving that they have at least some English efficiency, but they cannot communicate. So these are not people who are coming to the United States with the hope of getting a great education, settling here, and accomplishing the American dream. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to come here and gain information in whatever way they're gaining information, do whatever research. They're being paid handsomely by these outside forces. A lot of them come in and they go on government benefits, which was another problem altogether, that we're paying twice for this, right? We're edging out our own workforce and our own potential um, education there domestically and passing it on to someone else. And then, but these people just go home. They take it home. They have no desire to be here and stay here. And that's a huge problem. Like it's just a huge problem. And I saw this over and over and over and over and over again. Um, so it's a massive problem. And I mean, I was thrilled that this is finally being addressed because, after doing that for several years, a little bit jaded about the fact that all of our major research institutions, and I worked at top tier schools, both in the medical field and just in a very large, very respected state university. And this is what I saw over and over and over again. So it's very concerning. And I really applaud the administration for recognizing that and doing something about it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting what happens over the next few months. And something we've talked about before is Harvard has decided to fight because it's getting cheers within its bubble. But what are they fighting for? They're fighting for the right to continue to discriminate. They're fighting for the right to allow hoodlums to rampage on the campus, harassing Jewish students. This is what they're fighting for. They're not fighting for anything that's worth fighting for. Okay, they've dug this grave for themselves.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I mean, I know that the administration is just using Harvard as their test case here in some ways, but I mean, they're the ones who've committed the offense. They're not innocent by any means. They're not picking on them, um, but they've been so hostile towards everything that the administration has done. They've been so hostile towards American interests in general. So yeah, Harvard. I mean, at least in my book, is getting much of what they deserve. I'm not a tit for tat kind of person, mostly, but on the public stage, the things that they've done and the things that they've been able to get away with for a very long time are now being brought to account. And it's nice to watch. It's nice to watch some kind of accountability for once.
I mean, think about it. You say Harvard has been doing this for a long time. I don't think people realize how long they've been doing this. In the 1920s, they invented the quota system for admissions to keep Jews out. In the whole person view, I forget what they call it, that whole thing of moving away from objective measures like test scores and considering other things was developed by Harvard in the 1920s to keep the number of Jews low, to reduce the number of Jews. They have been a pox on our educational system at least since the 1920s. They
Mm-hmm.
then took that model that they used against Jews, used it against Asians and whites in the affirmative action field. I mean, the Harvard model of admissions is exactly what the Supreme Court said was illegal and unlawful, and they've been doing it since the 1920s. That's the Harvard attitude, and
Mm-hmm.
they think they're above everybody else. And I went there, so I know it that that's the attitude. They truly believe that they know better and they're immune to accountability. And now they're finding out otherwise. And I will give a shout out also to Marco Rubio. I said before that Fetterman has been the most positive surprise in the recent year in politics. I think Marco Rubio is at least tied, probably surpasses him. So I would like to retract and rephrase my prior comments that Fetterman's been the most positive surprise. I think Marco Rubio has. It's like a different guy. It's like, who is this Marco Rubio? He's not the little Marco of old days. He's got fire in the belly. He's so articulate in an administration that's not chock full of articulate people. Okay. And I think Marco Rubio's star is rising dramatically. There may be people who hold grudges against him from the 2016 cycle, but as somebody, you know, it's not too early to start thinking about 2028. And I know that there will be people who, like Vance, and will disagree with me vehemently and will probably try to shout me down if I say this in public. But I think that um, his he's one of the contenders for 2028. I would still say that assuming this 4 years goes well, successful, I would say Vance is kind of the next in line. But Rubio's got huge name recognition, not just name recognition, but huge personality. I think I think if he were to choose to run for president, and Vance is the opponent, or the main opponent in the primaries, I think it might be a lot closer than you think. I think it might be, closer than you think. Whether he'll want to do that or not, and 3 years from now is a long time, but really the presidential cycle is going to start in 2 years, not
Yes.
3 years. And I think Rubio has been a massive positive surprise.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with that. And the thing is, I, many moons ago, had covered all of these people when they came up in the Tea Party years, including Marco Rubio, and interviewed him personally many times. And like Ted Cruz and like Rand Paul, I would say Marco Rubio and Rand Paul in particular are just good people. Like, they're just good people. I think it seems like Rubio seems to have kind of found his stride where he's no longer coming off as overly polished and overly didactic and, just looking like a politician and speaking like a politician. When Trump started attacking him in the last cycle, the end of his campaign was when he came out and tried to behave like Trump, and it failed. I mean, it destroyed him because that was not him. Trump can get away with it because that's just who he is and how he is, and he berates everybody and gives them like these childish but hilarious and accurate nicknames, and so it it bombed for him and ended his campaign ultimately when he came out, because what people liked about him was that he was not that way. He brought a poise and a class to the podium when he spoke. And so what we're seeing now, and I know we mentioned earlier in these committee hearings, is that he's being very candid. He's being what appears to be very authentically himself. He's being assertive. He's not putting up with anything from anyone. He's refusing these ridiculous allegations against both himself personally, and the administration and the State Department. He's having none of it, but he's doing it in a way that just seems very natural. And I think I have no thoughts or opinions on the next election cycle. I can't even think about that right now. I'm just trying to get to the end of May and into the summer. Um, but I do think this is going to serve him really well if he's not overly fatigued by the end of, this administration, because especially in Trump world, it seems like, and I'm sure it's part of Trump's personality, they just churn and burn through people because there's so much. And the vitriol that they face, I think, is a huge contributor to it, just as much as anything else, too. That just like Elon Musk, you become public enemy number one when you agree to work with the Trump administration. But he's been a major surprise. I was really excited for him when he was appointed to this place, too, because he's wanted to move beyond the Senate for a long time now, and had hoped, I think, there was an opportunity for the his current role as head of Secretary of State. I'm totally blanking. In Trump's first term, and it didn't happen. But I really like him in this place. I really like him in this role. Whether that translates beyond it, we'll find out. But I mean, I agree that he's been a huge bright spot and a huge surprise. And like I said, if just knowing what I was able to witness from him before he even hit the national stage, really, or was just coming on to the national stage, he's just a stable person. He and his wife are just lovely people, and very down to earth, very easygoing, obviously very bright, very intelligent, um, has a great recall. So we will see. But I think that wraps it up for today. I think that's all we have. So much more to cover, but we'll leave it there. And this is our last episode for May, so I guess next time we are back will be June, and very, very hot where I am. So, um, anyway, but yeah, thank you for joining us today. As always, like, share, click the thumbs up, click all the buttons that say that this is good and you like it. If you have any thoughts, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you and love to hear your feedback, as long as it's nice. So, but you can find all of the links to everything we discussed today at legalinsurrection.com/28. And we'll see you next time.